Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by Peter Oliver, whose work includes Trying, Doctor Who, and more recently, Baby Reindeer for Netflix. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
One of my questions for you is, I found online that you started as a sculptor before editing. I'm wondering, how did you make the transition from sculpting to editing? But also, like, like I've talked to a lot of editors and they always refer to editing like sculpting because you're
Yeah,
removing all the extra stuff. So, like, what are the connections? What have you taken from sculpting that you love and to use in editing?
I think you're right. It's very similar to sculpting, and it's either taking from or building up. If
Mhm.
you have a clay sculpture, you're always adding, 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 and that's how I see it. I did a fine art degree, and I built sculptures, but they were too big to keep, and so I video documented those sculptures, and then it's funny. I On my course there was a room that no one ever used, and it was a video editing suite, and so I kind of dusted that down and um, learned myself, which back then there was what was it, 30 years ago? It was a lot harder then because
Hmm.
you didn't have YouTube and all of that kind of stuff, or you didn't have as much advice online, and so it took me a while to figure it out. And I did tape to tape, videotape to tape, and yeah, that became the art. Um, so I do always see it as very sculptural, putting scenes together and with the different angles and the different light sources and just how it all fits together, I think is very sculptural. And sometimes I know more about the rhythm than actually what's going on in the scene, which I probably
Hmm.
shouldn't say, but it kind of, if it rhythmically feels right, then that's where I go, really. And I don't mind chopping lines and all that kind of stuff just to make it feel right. And also with the pauses and the reactions and actions in the scene, I think are just as important as the dialogue.
I think what attracted me to color correction was the fact that we were like the next stage of cinematography. And the creative side was huge, trying to understand what was wrong with an image, how to balance it, trying to understand how to let the tools do what you want them to do. Where else can the technology go? What else can we do? I'm very interested in trying to mold the image and create the best look possible. And whatever tools are out there, you want to try and latch onto them. I'm Eric Whipp, and this is my course on color correction.
Well, I'd love to know how you got involved with Baby Reindeer.
Yeah, as you said, I'd done a fair bit of comedy with Skins, which was a UK program, and kind of Doctor Who was a lighter show, and then but I still had. I mean, the Doctor Who's that I did were quite dark. I did the can't remember what they're called now. There was one in Doll's House and another one, um, the TARDIS, the Doctor's Wife. Yeah, and so they were quite dark episodes, and then I've always really enjoyed doing the darker side of things with comedy. So the kind of comic, like Skins, I think was dark, and then had lighter comic moments. And I also did In My Skin, and This Is Going to Hurt. This Is Going to Hurt was obviously about the NHS, and it's very dark. And I did that just before I did Baby Reindeer, and then Baby Reindeer script came along, and my agent sent it to me, and she said it's a bit quirky. Have a read and see what you think. And by that night, I phoned her straight back and said, "No, we need to get an interview for this straight away, because it was perfectly that genre of darkness, but with comedy as well. Especially in the first three episodes, and then obviously it gets darker. But I've always liked the darkness, and it's easier to make people cry than make people laugh. So I do tend to do a lot of dark stuff, but as long as there's some light in it, and as long as there's some hope in it as well.
Yeah, well, and I was going to ask you about that balance of tone, because it does shift between comedy and really dark drama. So I'm wondering,
Yeah.
how did you balance that? And did you have to pull back at any point with the darkness or push it further? Like, how did you find that nice balance?
I think Veronica had an idea, and obviously Richard, whilst scripting it, had an idea of how that balance would work. But we certainly pushed it backwards and forwards in the edit suite. Like, for instance, the first 2 minutes used to be like 7 or 8 minutes. There was a lot longer at the beginning with when Martha comes into the bar, and we decided to cut it right down because we didn't want her to look too strange at first, and so you kind of still wanted that comic. You still wanted it to feel comic at the beginning, and you wanted the audience to like her at the beginning, and warm to her at the beginning, which I think they do. And then you kind of intrigued by this character rather than thinking she's too dark. And so that was an area that we made it lighter. And we were always, I mean, it was so, there was like Veronica and I, first of all, did a director's cut. And then Richard came in and did his cut with us. And so there was always push and pull about how dark it should be, how light it should be. But there's moments when it's obvious that it gets darker. Like there's a scene in episode 1 where Martha, offers Donnie her phone and says, "Give me your phone number." And it's very light at the beginning, and it's written very light at the beginning, and she's joking with him at the beginning about it being her birthday, and she has a couple of innuendos, and it's all very funny, and you're warming to her. And then the moment she says, "Right, okay, here's my phone, give me your phone number," then the camera switches, and you see her look down the barrel, see her look down the middle of the camera, and suddenly the shift happens there. And then it gets darker in the second part of that. You get more suspicious about her, and it's that moment of, "Oh no, don't give her your phone number." And then so there were shifts like that, and we tried to play them earlier and later, the shift of darkness in a scene, but usually they would land where Richard has scripted them. And but there was obviously in episode 4 it got a lot darker, and so you kind of just have to go with the darkness in the scenes, especially the abuse scenes, and just play it very carefully in those scenes.
You kind of alluded to it at one moment where she looks down the camera and there's a change, but I noticed this throughout the series that a lot of the series is facial expressions. Like it's the facial expressions that are sort of guiding us through these moments.
Yeah.
I don't even know where I'm going with the question, but I would love to know, like, what did you look for in the rushes? Like, how did you use that to your advantage?
But Jess Gunning, who plays Martha, she was amazing at those, like very, very subtle, just shifting her forehead, and you kind of suddenly think, "Oh no, there's something dark happening here." And I watched through all the rushes, just every take over and over again, just to, just because there's in this there's tiny nuances in their performances, and you can go back to those previous takes and just take a tiny little reaction. And Jess was so good at changing a scene through just a facial expression, as you say. And then obviously Richard was great at that as well. And so I'd always, I kind of had sequences of just reactions that I'd go back to. So I'd cut them out of the rushes, all all the takes and have them as a sequence, so that I could easily go back and go, okay, this is the reaction to that, and these are 5 other reactions that we've got. And so it kind of builds like that, but it's also how long to hold on. And sometimes it's great to hold on someone awkwardly for too long, especially if Martha's hurt. You kind of want to hold on her, so it's kind of everyone's thinking, oh no, let's move on, and you just hold the audience with her on that shot. And so we did a lot of those kind of things, just holding longer than people would feel safe with.
Yeah. I know you cut the first 4 episodes. I would love to know, because there's a lot of setup in the first 3 for the 4th one, but like what I always have been told is that the pilot's one of the tougher ones to cut, because you're trying to find the show in it and trying to figure out the different things. So I'm wondering, what changed in the pilot from the script, and what you guys worked with.
Well, you're right. I mean, the pilot, you have to set up the characters, and you have to have the audience understand who the characters are. So it is always the hardest, I think, episode to cut. But what changed between so episode 1 was all about like setting Donnie and Martha up and who they were and the dynamic between the 2 of them, and then the confusion at the end when he accepts her on Facebook. But then I think you want to be more with Donnie after that, because you kind of like, who is this guy? What is going on? We had a lot of discussions about how much of Martha we should have versus how much of Donnie we should have in that first episode, because it is Donnie's story, and we just you didn't want to confuse the audience about actually, is it Martha's story, because it could easily have become Martha's story. But I think by the end of that, when he accepts her, then you could kind of really know that it's his story. And we worked on that through the other 3 episodes up until 4 as well, just to make it more and more Donnie and his reaction to this strange woman who had come into his life.
In episode 4, it gets quite dark and you're dealing with a lot of heavy content. I'm wondering, what was the discussion like in the cutting room about where to go with this, and again, how far to push something like that and where to pull back?
I mean, the scenes were very hard in the middle of episode 4, when Veronica and I sat and worked through them. We'd go back to the rushes a lot, just when we were in the room together, before anyone else came in. And yeah, I mean, it's awkward, but you kind of just really need to tell that story. And for me, it's less about the abuse, but it's more about leading up to the abuse and after the abuse, the reactions and the power play between the characters. And how, I mean, the hardest part for me was when Donnie was sobbing on the floor after the abuse in episode 4, and that's what made me cry, just because it's kind of he was so thrown away at the end, when he was asked, do you want a cup of tea after all, and how do you take your tea? And that was the moment that I wanted to play longer on, rather than the actual abuse. I think everyone knew what was happening in the abuse, and so it was hard to watch through all of the rushes for that, because they'd covered it very well, but Veronica and I and Richard all agreed not to be too gratuitous with those scenes, and just to play those, and then have longer on the reactions at the end, and longer at the beginning when it starts, because everyone kind of knows what's going to happen, I think, just before. So we tried to concentrate on the start and the end rather than the actual abuse in both those scenes.
Now, in episode 2, there's towards the end, there's also a sexual assault. And I'm interested in how that plays out, because it sort of goes back to my previous question with the facial expressions and sort of that meeting just by the river. And I'm wondering, like, how did you approach the scene? You know, because it does sort of what you're saying, it does play out with sort of sitting on people and getting the reactions and playing that out. And I'm wondering, you know, what was your approach for this scene?
That scene is funny you said that, because I think that scene perfectly encapsulates what Baby Reindeer is about. Because you have the jump scare at the beginning of Martha in Donnie's way, and then she's funny in the middle with her jokes, and then there's a turn when Donnie suddenly realizes she's dangerous and tries to get away from her, and then the abuse at the end. So I think that it brilliantly shows how Richard writes, and I there I thought Martha was amazing in that scene, and so originally I played a lot more on Martha in that scene, but then with Richard's amazing reactions, I think we found the balance in that scene. But there was a lot of kind of how much do I think we tried a lot of music over it, and how could we make it darker? How could we really convey what's going on? And I think in the end, if my memory serves me correctly, that we didn't have a lot of music in that scene, that it was all quite bare, and I tried to concentrate on the breathing and put extra breaths in, and just the loneliness of that scene. So I took out a lot of the sound effects and tried to make it as minimal as possible, just so that you know that he hasn't got anywhere to go and that they're alone together. But yeah, as I say, it does. I think that does encapsulate everything of Baby Reindeer, that scene, just because you're shocked and then laughing, and then by the end, it's just terrifying.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about. I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now. Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
Now, Richard also did, you know, he wrote it, he directed, or he stars in it. You know, he's got multiple hats, but it also is his life. And I'm wondering, because there is sort of this balance of we have to make a compelling story to get viewers to continue watching, versus we also have to represent the truth. And so I'm wondering, like, working with him, how did you make sure that you were getting the best story out of it? Like, you know, were there moments that you guys had to sort of remove, or because it just wasn't working, that type of thing?
No, definitely. I think more that we shifted scenes around, and so there was a lot of restructuring after episode 2, probably 3 and 4. We just shift stuff around, but I think that Richard in the edit suite was brilliant. I mean, he was very generous with Veronica and I, and he liked what we did, but then we did go into a lot more work with him, because, as you say, it's about him and about his story, and so he would explain to us more about what had happened, and so we'd get a fuller story about where we were going and where we were coming from. And obviously the episode 4 was previous to Martha, and so we had to work kind of back from that, so we knew where we were going with the story, because the abuse he has in episode 4 is obviously a lot before Martha came in. And so with that knowledge, we kind of there was always something about Donnie that you think, oh, something else must have happened to him, and we kept pulling threads of that into the earlier episodes, and so it wasn't as simple as, okay, now we're cutting episode 1, 2, 3, and 4. We kept going back and forwards with the episodes in the edit suite and thinking, okay, how does this relate to here, and how much can we give away? And as you say, we took out a few scenes just because they were longer, the episodes, and also because everything earned its place. And rather than having all of the scenes in, I think we wanted to use the pauses and use the rhythm, so have more of a concertina, so we could have longer pauses rather than worrying about the timing of, oh, what about all of these other scenes? So it was a back and forth, and some of the scenes that were on the cutting room floor, as they say, were great as well, but we just needed to make everything work for itself.
Did the voiceover change at all? Like, how did that evolve in the cutting room?
Well, I think most of it was pretty much how Richard wrote it, but more the intonation of the voice changed, and so we'd change words, and again, because as it became a whole, we kind of knew where we were going and where we'd come from, and so so some of the voiceover would change. But Richard was in the edit suite for a long time, and so he'd go out into the corridor, re-record things, and it was quite funny because we didn't have a booth for him to sit in the offline, so he'd just be in the corridor wandering around talking about redoing his voiceover, which must have looked quite strange for anyone crossing him in the corridor. But then he'd come back and we'd ingest it, and we'd listen to it all together, and then we'd say, well, maybe this word should be this word, and yeah, so that was quite a time-consuming process. And also the execs and the producers would come in and listen to that, and then he'd re-record certain words or rephrase certain things, but he was always very gracious about that as well, and he'd always just pop out and rechange the voiceover at any point.
Now, I have one last question for you, and it's just a fun question that I use to wrap up my interviews. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Oh, guilty pleasure film or TV? I've just watched Ripley, actually,
Oh, yeah.
which was, and I think we're up against them, so I probably shouldn't say that. But I just found that just really, really great to watch, just because, and it was one of those series which I sneaked down in the night just to quickly watch 10 minutes and then go back to bed. But I just found it so compelling, just because you were just with the character the whole time, and so there was no rush in the edit. It was all took its time, and there was no action. Well, I mean, there are a few action scenes in it. I won't ruin it for anyone, but it's it was so clever right up to the end, and then at the end it was brilliant as well. So yeah, I think Ripley's my newest guilty pleasure, at least.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview.
Thank you, and enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you. That's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Instagram at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.